The public is conditioned to watch the skies for the burn of a missile engine. The media sells the spectacle of kinetic impact. This is a fundamental miscalculation. The primary vector of 21st century conflict is not the explosion. It is the systemic silence that precedes it. The weapon is not the warhead, it is the circuit breaker. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS have mapped the critical vulnerability. Over 95% of global data, including trillions in daily financial transactions, travels through a finite number of undersea cables. These are the arteries of global solvency. They are functionally undefended, resting on the ocean floor, a liability openly published on public maps. The second vector of silence is orbital. The commercial asset is now the military shield. This is not a theory. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency's prime contract with AST SpaceMobile under the SHIELD program confirms the protocol. A civilian communication satellite is now, by definition, an integral component of the national missile defense architecture. This forces the creation of the primary strategic target for any asymmetric actor, the blind Leviathan. A Tier 1 nation-state stripped of its data feeds, its sight, its hearing, its liquidity, becomes a panicked, thrashing giant. Its overwhelming kinetic power, deprived of targeting data, becomes a systemic liability. The objective is not to defeat the Leviathan. The objective is to make it blind itself, triggering a launch-on-warning cascade based on institutional fear. This is not hypothetical. The thwarted cyber attack on the Polish energy grid was a test of this exact doctrine. The discovery of Russian attack drones weaponizing commercial Starlink-type terminals is the blueprint made manifest. An attack on the off switch is no longer a commercial liability. It is a kinetic first strike on a nation's defense architecture with a direct vector to thermonuclear exchange. To understand the blueprint, you must first understand the motive. This is not a geopolitical chess match. It is a solvency crisis. Weaker actors are not lashing out from a position of strength. They are executing a pivot born from catastrophic domestic failure. The model for this systemic collapse is Venezuela, a nation that serves as a case study in how history and oil politics can engineer a terminal decline. A state rich in assets, rendered insolvent by its own internal architecture. This is the precise vector Russia is on. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS frame the Ukraine conflict as a profound domestic liability. The kinetic cost of conventional warfare, the expenditure of tanks, artillery, and manpower, has exceeded the state's capacity to sustain it without triggering internal collapse. The war has become politically and economically unpopular, a financial black hole that threatens the regime's own liquidity. Weakness forces a pivot to asymmetry. When you can no longer afford a symmetric, kinetic fight, you are forced to change the equation. The objective shifts from battlefield victory to inflicting maximum systemic damage on your adversary at the lowest possible cost. This is not a bug, it is a feature of state-level insolvency. This mathematical certainty explains the weaponization of civilian infrastructure. Why deploy a multi-million-dollar missile when you can equip a disposable drone with a commercial Starlink-type terminal, as documented in recovered Russian hardware? The target is no longer the enemy's army, but its core economic function, the Polish energy grid, for example. It is a direct attack on the adversary's societal solvency, using cheap, ubiquitous technology as the primary vector. The central equation of warfare has inverted. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, documents the new kinetic cost basis. A state invests $5 million in a main battle tank. The adversary, leveraging a globalized supply chain, counters with a $500 first-person view drone. The math does not lie. That is a 10,000 to 1 cost asymmetry. This is not a sustainable economic model for national defense. It is a blueprint for systemic insolvency. This economic disparity creates what intelligence circles call the democratization of violence. Lethality is no longer monopolized by Tier 1 military budgets. Any actor, state or non-state, with access to commercial electronics can now field a credible anti-armor, anti-infrastructure capability. A systemic failure like Venezuela is no longer just a humanitarian crisis. It is a potential launchpad for asymmetric operations, fielding capabilities that can threaten assets previously considered hardened. The drone itself is merely the endpoint. The true weapon is the command and control vector. As Ukrainian specialists confirmed when analyzing a downed Russian BM-35 drone, these assets are being controlled via commercial satellite terminals. This effectively transforms civilian infrastructure into a military-grade guidance system. The Polish energy grid is not attacked by a state army, but by a disposable asset guided through a commercial network anyone can access. This is the lethal feature, not a bug. The result is an inescapable protocol response. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency absorbing a commercial entity like AST SpaceMobile into its SHIELD program is not a partnership. It is an annexation. It is the formal militarization of civilian assets to counter their weaponization by adversaries. The line is erased. An attack on a civilian satellite is now a kinetic strike on a nation's missile defense architecture, a direct vector to a launch-on-warning posture. The global order is not decaying. It is being re-engineered in shadow. The chaos you see in regions from the Americas to Southern Africa is not a random system failure. It is a feature. These zones of instability are no longer just humanitarian liabilities. They are now strategic laboratories. Systemic breakdowns, exemplified by the solvency crisis in Venezuela, create the perfect gray zone, ungoverned territory used to stage and perfect asymmetric protocols. While legacy media focuses on the symptom, the blueprint for the weapon is being refined in these labs. The tactic is simple: weaponize global civilian infrastructure. Analysts at RUSI confirm what was recovered from the battlefield. Russian one-way attack drones are now equipped with Starlink-type satellite terminals. This is the proof of concept. A commercial service designed for connectivity has been reverse-engineered into a targeting vector for kinetic assets. This is not theoretical. The protocol was deployed. Reports confirm Poland thwarted a major cyber attack targeting its energy grid in December 2025. This was not a simple hack. It was a test of a gray zone doctrine. Using deniable, asymmetric vectors perfected in lawless regions against the hardened infrastructure of a Tier 1 nation. The attack demonstrates a clear capability to inflict systemic damage with minimal kinetic cost. The response from Tier 1 nations is not diplomatic. It is a mathematical certainty. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency has awarded a prime contract to AST SpaceMobile, formally absorbing a commercial satellite network into the National SHIELD program. The line between a publicly traded company and a military defense architecture has been erased. This is not a partnership. It is militarization by protocol. This creates a terrifyingly unstable escalation ladder. An attack on a civilian satellite is no longer a commercial liability insured by Lloyd's of London. It is a direct, kinetic strike on a nation's missile defense shield. Regional instability, whether it's a travel warning for Canada or a resource crisis in South Africa, must now be viewed through this lens. They are the staging grounds, the gray zones, where the next trigger for a launch-on-warning scenario is being tested. The systemic risk now has a direct vector to thermonuclear exchange. The protocol is absolute. It is called launch-on-warning. It is not a choice. It is a mathematical equation designed to prevent a national solvency crisis measured in megatons. The doctrine dictates that if reliable sensors detect an incoming nuclear strike, you launch a full retaliatory strike before the enemy's warheads arrive. Waiting for impact is not an option. It means the kinetic cost is your own annihilation, leaving zero assets for a response. But the new blueprint weaponizes ambiguity. The vector of attack is no longer purely kinetic, it is digital. We have confirmation that hardened targets like the Polish energy grid are being targeted by major cyber attacks. Now apply that same logic to the defense architecture of a Tier 1 nation. The most systemic risk, according to CSES analysts, is a coordinated cyber attack that blinds the early warning system itself, the satellites, the ground-based radar, the communication nodes. This triggers what military strategists call the fog of digital war. The radar screens go black. The satellite feeds display no signal. The commander in the bunker now operates with zero visibility. The critical question becomes unanswerable. Is this a system failure, a non-kinetic probe? Or is it the deliberate blinding that precedes a decapitating first strike, with enemy missiles already in the air, timed to impact during the induced sensor blackout? The launch-on warning protocol has no variable for ambiguity. In the absence of confirming data, the protocol defaults to the highest threat scenario to ensure survival. The mathematical certainty of being disarmed forces the commander to launch out of fear. The cyber attack does not need to fire a shot. It only needs to create enough doubt to force the target to fire theirs. This is the ultimate asymmetric leverage. An attack with zero kinetic cost that triggers a response with an infinite one. A full thermonuclear exchange born from digital darkness. The protocol has a designation, the calibration shot. It is not an attack, it is a measurement. A low-cost kinetic probe designed to acquire data on the response latency of Western security architecture. The objective is not destruction, but the precise quantification of the threshold required to trigger a systemic solvency crisis without initiating a launch-on warning military posture. The next vector will not be a hardened target like the Polish energy grid. That was a known variable. The mathematical certainty, based on the weaponization of commercial networks seen with Russian drones, now points to a softer, more leveraged target. Within the next 10 months, anticipate a coordinated logistics blackout at the port of Rotterdam. The event will manifest as a cascading systemic failure, a simultaneous grid anomaly coupled with a zero-day exploit in the terminal operating system. The attack vector will be laundered through multiple commercial satellite relays, making direct attribution a mathematical impossibility. There will be no demands. The 48-hour paralysis is the message, a non-attributable display of the capability to sever a primary economic artery of NATO. This is a final calibration before a true kinetic strike on militarized commercial infrastructure like AST Space Mobile becomes a viable first strike option.